There are battles that do not arrive with swords or thunder, but with silence, fear, exhaustion, and the feeling that heaven has gone quiet. You stand in the field alone, believing strength must come from your own hands. Yet many of God's greatest interventions begin when human power reaches its end. The soul discovers that help often travels unseen before it is ever recognized. What feels like abandonment may actually be preparation for divine reinforcement. There is a peculiar burden that settles upon the human heart when suffering arrives. It whispers that this battle is yours alone, that if you cannot overcome it by your own strength, then you have somehow failed. The soul begins to measure itself by endurance. It believes that faith means never trembling, that courage means never asking for help, and that holiness is proven by silent endurance. Yet this idea is not born from truth. It is born from pride disguised as responsibility. Many people stand in hidden wars no one can see. The battle may not be against armies or storms. It may be against loneliness that grows louder at night, against memories that refuse to loosen their grip, against disappointments that have settled into the walls of the heart. Some fight the fear of tomorrow. Others fight the weight of yesterday. There are battles of provision, battles of purpose, battles of waiting, and battles against the terrible feeling that heaven has forgotten their name. In such moments, the human spirit often tightens its grip. It says, "I must become stronger. I must carry more. I must solve this by myself." But the tragedy is not weakness. The tragedy is believing that weakness disqualifies you from divine help. We have inherited the strange belief that needing assistance is a sign of failure when, perhaps, it is the first sign that grace is near. A soldier carrying a shield does not apologize for it. A traveler walking through winter does not feel shame for wearing a coat. Why then does the soul feel asha, med when it longs for help from God? The very nature of prayer is an admission that the battle exceeds human reach. Every whispered plea is a confession that there are mountains too large for bare hands and valleys too deep for personal strength. God never promised that every war would be conquered through human effort. If anything, Scripture repeatedly reveals the opposite pattern. The shepherd defeats the giant not because he is stronger. The wanderer survives the wilderness not because he is wiser. The broken are lifted, the weary are restored, and the uncertain are guided. Divine history is filled with ordinary people discovering that heaven enters where human ability ends. Yet the heart resists this lesson. It wishes to remain self-sufficient. It fears dependence because dependence feels like surrender. But surrender, in the language of faith, is not defeat. It is alignment. It is the moment a person stops saying, "I will carry everything," and begins saying, "I was never meant." 2. Think of the soul as a lantern in a vast night. Left alone, its oil eventually runs dry. It flickers. It dims. It grows afraid of the darkness around it. But God did not design the lantern to create endless light from itself. It was always meant to be refilled. Strength was never intended to be self-generated forever. There are people listening to this message who have mistaken exhaustion for duty. They believe their weariness proves devotion. They have carried family burdens, private griefs, silent disappointments, and unseen fears. They keep standing, yet inside they are asking how much longer they must fight alone. The answer may be gentler than expected. Perhaps the question itself reveals the truth. You were never asked to become an army of one. The battle feels immense because human shoulders were not built to hold eternal weight. The mind grows tired. The heart becomes heavy. Even faith can feel bruised when it tries to survive without rest. But divine help does not arrive. Because you have finally become strong enough to deserve it. It arrives because God understands the limits of dust and breath. He knows the architecture of human weakness because he formed it. So the struggle before you may indeed be real. The mountain may not disappear overnight. The storm may still stand at the horizon. Yet the greatest deception would be believing that the outcome depends entirely upon your own power. There are battles where effort matters, but there are also battles where trust becomes the greater weapon, where lifted hands accomplish more than clenched fists, where dependence becomes the hidden doorway through which heaven begins to move, and this is where the soul encounters a mystery it rarely expects. Long before you cried out for help, long before your knees weakened beneath the weight of the struggle, long before your prayers became desperate enough to carry tears, heaven may already have been moving. Human beings often imagine divine help as an answer that T begins after the request, as though God waits at a distance until the voice becomes loud enough to hear. Yet much of faith rests upon a quieter thought. Help may already be on its way while you still believe you are abandoned. The heart judges by sight. It counts visible victories, open doors, immediate answers, and clear signs. If none appear, it concludes that nothing is happening. But the absence of evidence is not always the absence of activity. A seed beneath the earth appears lifeless before it rises. Dawn exists before it is seen at the horizon. The river is already moving beneath winter ice, though the surface seems frozen. So it is with many works of God. There are moments when you pray for rescue while the rescue has already begun in places you cannot yet reach. A conversation is being prepared. A delay is protecting you from a path that would have harmed you. A person is being shaped to enter your story. Wisdom is growing within you quietly, unnoticed, while you keep asking, why nothing is changed. Heaven often works beneath the visible layer of life. This becomes difficult because human pain demands immediate proof. When suffering lasts, the mind begins writing fearful conclusions. It says, if I cannot see help, there is no help. It says, if the answer has not arrived, then I have been forgotten. But many times the soul mistakes hidden preparation for silence. Imagine standing in a valley surrounded by high mountains. Your voice echoes back to you, and you believe no one heard it. Yet beyond those mountains, movement has already begun. Footsteps are approaching. Paths are being crossed. The answer exists, though distance keeps it hidden from your eyes. The tragedy is that many leave the field too early. They abandon hope not because help failed to come, but because it had not yet appeared in the form they expected. They wanted thunder and received stillness. They wanted immediate escape and received endurance. They wanted the battle removed, God began by strengthening the warrior. Divine help does not always enter dramatically. Sometimes it arrives disguised as patience that should not exist. Sometimes it comes as unexpected peace in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it appears through a stranger, a message, a memory, a moment of clarity, or strength that rises for no visible reason. The soul looks for miracles in the sky while heaven quietly places them within ordinary moments. There is also another truth that unsettles human pride. God may prepare help before you believe you deserve it. We often imagine we must become worthy first. We think the answer waits for perfect faith, flawless obedience, or unwavering confidence. But grace has never followed human merit. Many receive help while still doubting. Many are carried while still afraid. Many are guided while still uncertain. This means your weakness has not delayed God as much as you fear. You may be standing in a season where nothing seems to move. Every prayer feels suspended. Every effort appears unanswered. The days repeat themselves with heavy sameness. Yet beneath that stillness, unseen things may already be unfolding. What feels like delay could be arrangement. What feels like emptiness could be preparation. The soul often wants the entire map, but heaven usually gives only enough light for the next step. Not because God delights in mystery, but because trust grows differently when sight is limited. If every answer arrived instantly, faith would become calculation. But when help moves invisibly, the heart learns to lean beyond what it can prove. Perhaps this is why some of the greatest moments of rescue are recognized only in hindsight. Years later, a person looks back and realizes that what seemed like abandonment was protection. What seemed like waiting was construction. What seemed like silence was movement hidden beneath the surface. And while you stand in this present battle, staring at walls that appear unchanged, there may already be unseen preparations unfolding around you, doors you cannot yet see, strength not yet revealed, people not yet met, lessons not yet understood, mercies not yet recognized. Because God often sends help before human eyes are capable of recognizing its arrival, and many of the battles that feel empty are already surrounded by movement beyond the reach of sight, beyond the limits of fear, beyond the conclusions the weary heart has written for itself, beyond the silence that only seems motionless from where you stand, and yet the silence remains. This is the part of the journey that troubles the soul more than the battle itself. Pain can be endured when meaning is visible. Hardship can be carried when progress is seen. But silence creates a different kind of suffering. It makes a person wonder whether heaven has stepped away. It causes the heart to ask dangerous questions in the dark. Has God stopped listening? Has my prayer reached no one? Has this stillness become the final answer? T. The human spirit fears silence because it often mistakes it for emptiness. We live by voices, signs, movement, and evidence. We want answers that arrive quickly and clearly. We long for doors that open at once. Yet many of God's deepest works seem to unfold beneath quiet skies. Consider how creation itself moves. The roots of great trees grow in darkness. Oceans shift beneath surfaces that appear calm. Stars travel through space without sound. Some of the greatest forces in existence perform their work without announcement. Why then should the soul assume that divine activity must always arrive with visible power? There are seasons where nothing outward changes, yet everything inward begins to move. A person enters prayer feeling shattered and leaves without the problem removed, yet somehow less afraid. The mountain still stands. The battle remains. The circumstances appear untouched, but something invisible has shifted. Courage has entered quietly. Hope has returned without fanfare. Strength has appeared where weakness once ruled. Heaven often begins its work in hidden places before the world notices any difference. Still, silence tests faith because it strips away certainty. It removes the comfort of immediate proof. The soul stands in the space between promise and fulfillment, between asking and receiving, between night and dawn. This waiting place is where many grow weary. Some imagine that faith means never questioning, but even faithful hearts ask why. They look toward heaven and wonder why the answer seems delayed. They search the horizon for movement and find only stillness. They kneel with expectation and rise with the same circumstances. In these moments, silence feels heavy enough to become its own burden. Yet perhaps silence is not always the absence of God's voice. Perhaps it is sometimes the chamber where deeper things are formed. A sculptor strikes stone repeatedly before the image appears. A writer spends countless unseen hours before the book exists. Preparation often happens where applause cannot reach. The soul, too, is shaped in hidden rooms. There are virtues that noise cannot produce. Patience grows in waiting. Endurance grows in uncertainty. Trust grows where evidence is incomplete. These things are not comfortable companions, but they often become necessary ones. The world teaches that value lies in speed, faster answers, faster victories, faster results. But heaven frequently works with another rhythm, not because delay is good in itself, but because timing can protect what haste would destroy. You may be asking for immediate relief while God is building lasting strength. You may be seeking escape while heaven prepares endurance. You may want the storm removed while something within you is learning to stand. This does not mean suffering is celebrated. Pain is still pain. Tears remain real. The lonely nights do not become easier simply because meaning may exist within them. Yet silence loses some of its terror when. Do you understand that stillness and absence are not the same thing? A mother watching over a sleeping child does not speak every moment, yet her presence remains. The lighthouse says nothing to the ship, yet it still guides. The sun does not announce its arrival while beneath the horizon, yet dawn continues toward the earth. So the quiet season may not be empty after all. What if the unanswered prayer is not abandoned but unfolding? What if the delay is not rejection but arrangement? What if heaven has not withdrawn but moved into places beyond immediate sight? The weary heart often demands visible proof before it will trust. But faith asks another question. Can you remain when evidence grows thin? Can you continue when certainty disappears? Can you believe that movement exists even while silence covers the field? Because many of God's greatest interventions are hidden beneath ordinary days. They grow beneath disappointment. They move behind closed doors. They travel through time, unseen. And while the world calls it delay, heaven may call it preparation. The silence around you may feel endless now. The battle may still stand where it stood yesterday. The answer may remain hidden from your eyes. Yet unseen things have a way of becoming visible when their hour arrives. And what appears motionless today may already be carrying the first footsteps of help across distances the human heart cannot measure, through quiet places where heaven works without noise and where divine hands continue their labor even when the soul believes nothing is happening at all, and when the hour of help finally begins to reveal itself. It rarely appears in the manner the human mind expected. We imagine rescue as something grand. We wait for the heavens to open, for impossible signs, for dramatic moments that remove all doubt. Yet many times God sends assistance wrapped in ordinary clothing. The soul looks upward for fire, while heaven quietly moves through familiar paths. This is 1:0. If the great surprises of faith, the unseen allies of God do not always arrive carrying visible banners. They enter softly. They move through unnoticed doors. They often stand near us while we continue asking where help will come from. A person may pray for strength and receive a conversation. Another may beg for direction and receive a delay. One asks for rescue and finds unexpected peace instead. At first, these things seem too small. The heart dismisses them because they do not resemble the miracle it imagined. But heaven is not bound by human expectations. There are moments when help arrives as wisdom, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that quietly changes a decision. A single thought enters the mind at the right time. A path once desired suddenly loses its attraction. A dangerous step is avoided without explanation. Years later, the soul realizes that what felt like confusion was actually protection. There are moments when help arrives through people, not always the powerful, not always the obvious. Sometimes through a stranger whose words remain long after the meeting ends. Sometimes through a friend who stays when everyone else leaves. Sometimes through someone who appears ordinary and yet carries exactly what the weary heart needs. We often underestimate how heaven uses human hands. The world teaches independence as though needing others is weakness. Yet much of God's kindness moves through companionship. A voice that says, "You are not alone." A hand extended during collapse. A presence that remains without demanding answers. These things may appear small to the eye, but to a wounded soul they can feel like light entering a locked room. Then there is another form of help the human heart rarely appreciates while it is happening. Interruption. We resent closed doors. We mourn delays. We struggle against changed plans. Yet some of life's greatest mercies first appear as disappointments. The opportunity disappears. The path narrows. The answer becomes, not yet. The soul grieves because it sees loss. Only later does it understand that protection had been standing quietly in the doorway. How many disasters have been avoided without our knowledge? How many unseen dangers passed unnoticed because heaven intervened before awareness arrived? We count the blessings we can see, yet perhaps there are countless mercies hidden in what never happened. The unseen allies of faith also move within the soul itself. Peace appears where panic once lived. Endurance rises in exhausted places. Hope returns without explanation. These changes are easy to overlook because they happen inwardly. The mountain still stands. The battle continues. Yet the person facing it has become different. And sometimes that change is the first miracle. The enemy of the soul often wants dramatic proof because dramatic things are easier to recognize. But God frequently chooses quiet transformations. He plants courage one moment at a time. He restores trust through SMA, or mercies. He rebuilds shattered places patiently. The human heart longs for instant victories, yet heaven often prefers deeper foundations. Think of a cathedral. It rises stone by stone. No single day reveals its final beauty. Many would walk away believing nothing important is happening. Yet hidden labor continues. Piece after piece joins together until one day the structure stands complete. So it is with divine help. You may be waiting for a thunderclap while God is sending steady footsteps. You may be looking for extraordinary signs while heaven is working through ordinary moments. The answer may already be present in conversations you nearly ignored, in delays you resisted, in peace you could not explain, in strength that appeared without announcement. The battle is still real. The enemy still feels near. The road may remain difficult, but help does not always descend as spectacle. Sometimes it enters quietly and sits beside the weary. Sometimes it walks beside the uncertain. Sometimes it hides inside timing people, wisdom, restraint, and unexpected grace. And the soul that learns to recognize these hidden companions begins to understand that it was never standing alone in the field at all, because even in the darkest hours there were movements taking place beyond sight, gentle reinforcements arriving without noise, silent mercies gathering at the edges of the battle while heaven continued sending aid through ways so ordinary that only faith could recognize their sacred purpose. And perhaps this is the moment where the human heart resists most strongly. It can accept struggle. It can endure silence. It can even wait for unseen help. But to admit weakness, this feels unbearable. Something within us rises in protest. We wish to appear strong before others, strong before ourselves, and sometimes even strong before God. We hide our trembling as though heaven were impressed by our ability to endure without breaking. Yet many of God's deepest works begin preciously, silly where human strength ends. The world celebrates power. It admires certainty, confidence, and self-sufficiency. It tells people to become unshakable, untouchable, invincible. But faith speaks with a quieter voice. It says that the soul is not ruined by weakness. It is merely reminded that it was never designed to be its own savior. There comes a point in every great battle when effort alone no longer seems enough. The hands grow tired. The mind loses clarity. The heart carries more weight than it can explain. A person who once stood firmly begins to wonder whether they can take another step. This moment feels like failure, but perhaps it is invitation. Because weakness has a strange way of opening doors that strength keeps closed. As long as a person believes they possess all they need, dependence appears unnecessary. They continue carrying impossible burdens, convinced that endurance alone will save them. Yet when exhaustion finally speaks, another truth emerges. Human limits are not accidents, they are reminders. A cracked vessel cannot boast of its own power. It simply waits to be filled. The soul is often the same. There are people who arrive at the edge of themselves and believe they have lost everything. Their plans collapsed, their confidence disappeared, their certainty dissolved. They stand among ruins wondering what remains, and in that place something unexpected begins. Prayer becomes honest, no longer polished, no longer impressive, no longer built from perfect words. It becomes simple, sometimes only a whisper, sometimes only tears, sometimes nothing more than, "I cannot do this anymore." Strangely, these may be the prayers closest to truth. For much of life, people speak to God from strength they believe they possess, but eventually they speak from emptiness. And emptiness, though painful, creates space. A full cup cannot receive more. A clenched hand cannot accept a gift. A soul convinced of its own sufficiency rarely notices the nearness of grace. This is why weakness is not always an enemy. It can become a doorway, not because suffering itself is holy, not because pain is desirable, but because broken places often lose the illusion of self-sufficiency. They become open in ways untouched places never had to. Consider the field after drought. The earth cracks beneath the sun. It appears ruined, lifeless, defeated. Yet those very openings allow rain to enter deeper than before. So it may be with the wounded heart. The cracks you hide, the fears you silence, the exhaustion you carry in secret, these may not be signs that God has moved away. They may be the places where His presence finds entrance. Still, pride fights this truth. It says, "Stand taller." Grace whispers, "Be honest." Pride says, "Carry more." Grace replies, "You were never meant to carry everything." Pride says, "Hide the weakness." Grace says, "Bring it into the light." There is great freedom in no longer pretending. The soul grows tired, ed from performance. It spends years acting stronger than it feels, wiser than it is, calmer than it remains. Yet God does not ask for perfection before offering help. He asks for openness. And openness often begins with confession. Not confession of failure alone, but confession of need. To say, "I am afraid." To admit, "I am tired." To acknowledge, "This battle is larger than me." These are not the words of defeat. They are the language of surrender. And surrender in the kingdom of faith is not collapse. It is the moment the burden changes hands. The mountain may remain for a while longer. The storm may still circle overhead. The enemy may continue pressing at the edges of your strength. But something shifts when weakness is no longer hidden. Because the soul stops fighting two battles at once. It no longer struggles against the world while also struggling to appear invincible. It simply stands as it is. Tired perhaps, wounded perhaps, uncertain perhaps, yet open. And in that openness, divine strength often enters quietly, not through triumph first, but through presence, not through immediate victory, but through companionship, not by removing every burden at once, but by stepping into the place where human effort has finally reached its limit, and where the weary heart, no longer pretending, becomes ready to receive what it could never create for itself. And once the heart becomes open, another battle reveals itself, one far quieter and often far more dangerous than the visible struggle. It is the battle of isolation, Not the kind measured by empty rooms or physical distance, but the deeper loneliness that settles inside the soul. A person can stand among crowds and still feel abandoned. They can smile in public while carrying a private winter no one else sees. This is one of the enemy's oldest strategies, not merely to wound but to separate, because a soul that feels isolated begins to believe strange things. It starts whispering to itself, "No, one understands." Then the whisper grows louder. No one sees. Eventually it becomes no one is coming. And after enough nights beneath that voice, the heart begins accepting loneliness as truth. Yet isolation is not always reality. Sometimes it is a shadow cast by suffering. Pain narrows vision. It causes a person to stare only at what has been lost. The unanswered prayer, the empty chair, the broken promise, the delayed rescue. Slowly the world becomes smaller until the soul stands inside a room built from its own sorrow. The tragedy is not merely that the room exists. It is that the person believes the door has disappeared. God rarely fights this battle with speeches. He often answers isolation with presence. Sometimes his answer comes through people. A message arrives at an unexpected hour. Someone remembers your name when you thought you had been forgotten. A friend remains after others leave. A quiet conversation carries more healing than long explanations.
These
moments seem ordinary to the world, yet to a weary spirit they feel like water in the desert. The human heart was not designed for endless solitude. Even the strongest among us eventually grow tired when carrying unseen burdens alone. We need voices outside our own fears. We need reminders when memory fails. We need companions who hold hope when ours grows weak. The enemy of the soul understands this. That is why despair often urges silence. Keep it hidden. Carry it yourself. Do not burden anyone. Stay quiet. At first, these thoughts appear noble. They sound like strength, but many times they become chains, because hidden pain tends to grow, unspoken grief deepens, loneliness feeds upon secrecy, and the soul begins drifting further from the very help meant to reach it. God's answer is often different. He sends people, not perfect people, not always wise people, simply present people, those who sit beside sorrow without trying to conquer it, those who remain wherever. Answers cannot be found, those who become small lights during long nights. The world celebrates heroes who save cities. Heaven often celebrates those who stay beside the broken. There is something sacred in companionship, to be seen without disguise, to be known without performance, to speak honestly and not be abandoned. Many carry wounds because they have never experienced this kind of presence. They learned to survive alone. They became experts at endurance. They built walls and called them strength. But walls protect and imprison at the same time. Eventually even safety becomes loneliness. Perhaps this is why God so often works through relationship. Not because people replace him, but because human presence can reflect divine care. A hand extended at the right moment may become more powerful than long explanations. A quiet listener may carry more healing than grand speeches. And there are also unseen forms of companionship. The sudden peace that arrives without reason. The strength that appears after nights of exhaustion. The strange sense that you are being carried when you know you should have collapsed. These moments remind the soul that absence and loneliness are not identical. You may feel alone. That feeling is real. But feelings are not always final truth. The battlefield still surrounds you. The struggle has not ended. The questions remain. Yet you are not standing in empty territory. There are prayers spoken for you that you never heard. People who care more than you realize. Mercy's already moving. Presence already near. And while despair continues building arguments for isolation, heaven continues sending companionship in quiet ways through voices, through kindness, through unexpected strength, through moments that arrive gently and refuse to leave, until the heart slowly discovers that what it called abandonment was not emptiness at all, but a hidden season where help was gathering around it long before it learned how to recognize the footprints of grace beside its own, and after all the struggle, all the waiting, all the hidden help, the soul arrives at a final and difficult lesson. It is the realization that victory may not come in the form it once imagined. Human beings often picture triumph as control. We think winning means every enemy defeated, every problem removed, every prayer answered exactly as requested. We dream of a day when the battle ends and we stand untouched by what happened. But many victories in the life of faith look very different. Sometimes the battle remains, yet fear loses its authority. Sometimes the storm continues, yet peace enters. Sometimes the mountain still stands, yet the soul no longer bows before it. The world would call this incomplete. Heaven may call it transformation. There is a quiet temptation that follows every difficult season. It tells a person that everything depends upon them. Fight harder, push further, carry more, trust your own hands above all else. The soul obeys for a while. It strains, it struggles. It exhausts itself trying to command what was never meant to be controlled. Eventually it reaches a sacred exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of defeat, the exhaustion of surrender. This is the moment many fear because surrender sounds like losing. It sounds like lowering the sword while the enemy still stands nearby. It feels dangerous, vulnerable, uncertain. Yet surrender in faith is not abandonment of effort. It is the release of ownership. The battle still matters. Your choices still matter. Your courage still matters. But the outcome no longer rests entirely upon your shoulders. And what a strange freedom this becomes. The soul that once lived beneath crushing responsibility suddenly breathes again. It stops trying to carry tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. It releases the impossible burden of controlling every path, every answer, every outcome. Trust enters where control once ruled. This does not happen all at once. Trust is rarely born in a single moment. It grows, quietly, slowly, like dawn entering a dark room. At first only a thin line of light appears. The shadows still remain. Fear still speaks. Questions still linger. Yet something is changed. The heart no longer fights alone. It no longer believes everything depends upon human strength. It no longer mistakes surrender for weakness. There are people who listen to stories of faith and imagine that great believers never trembled. They think trust means certainty without struggle. But many of the strongest souls walked with questions. They carried wounds. They felt the weight of uncertainty. What separated them was not the absence of fear. It was their refusal to let fear become master. They continued walking, not because they understood everything, because they trusted someone beyond their understanding. And perhaps this is the hidden victory your battle has been leading toward all along. Not merely the removal of pain, number, simply the arrival of answers, but the birth of deeper trust, a trust that survives silence, a trust that remains when help is unseen, a trust that stays even when strength fades. Because there comes a moment when the soul stops asking, how will I survive this? And begins asking, who walks with me through it? That question changes everything. The battle may still rage, the enemy may still whisper, the road may remain steep, yet trust transforms the field itself. What was once a place of terror becomes a place of encounter. What was once endless burden becomes shared weight. What was once isolation becomes companionship. And the person who entered the battle believing they must win alone slowly discovers that heaven had been present from the beginning, sending help before it was seen, working in silence, placing hidden companions along the road, entering weakness with strength, answering isolation with presence, and leading the weary soul toward the final revelation. That victory was never meant to rest entirely in human effort, but in the quiet and enduring act of placing trembling hands into the care of God while still standing in the middle of the storm, trusting not because every answer has arrived, but because His presence has become greater than the fear that once ruled the heart.